Think of topos. It's the plural of topos. It means place. So TOPOI stands for the 5 areas, the 5 places in the communications where differences and misunderstandings can arise. The first area is tongue. That is the verbal and non-verbal language of the persons involved in the conversation. And order, that's the content level in the communication that entails the view and logic of the partners in the communication regarding the issues at hand in the conversation. Persons is the area of the relational level in communication and concerns the identities, roles, and the relationships between the partners. An organization is the organizational and societal context in which the conversation takes place. And intentions, it's an inner category. You cannot see them, but they play an enormous important role in the communication. These are the motives, emotions, needs, and values of each person. In practice, you cannot divide these areas. They play simultaneously a role in the communication, but I distinguished them. I separated them to find many possible differences and misunderstanding that causes miscommunication. What is the aim of the TOPOI model? So it has 2 aims. First of all, it is the aim is to zoom in with the TOPOI lens, so we transform it in a lens to zoom in on the concrete conversation. So opposite to culturalistic approach, you zoom out immediately when it is about a conversation between people with different national, ethnic or religious backgrounds. They zoom out to look for an explanation for the behavior and the beliefs of the persons in the national culture or in the religion. We think that it's very important to zoom in, as already Arjan explained. So to zoom in on the concrete conversation, the involved persons, their interaction and their context, to detect the possible differences and misunderstandings in the communication. That's the first aim. I will illustrate it how it could work. And the second aim is to sensitize to the many diversity factors. So not only cultural, as already also Arjan explained. So there are many factors, not only cultural, who influences the communication. To sensitize for these many diversity factors in each area. Given the time, I cannot elaborate on each area, but in our book and in our certification training, we give lots of examples also from the practice on what kind of factors can influence the communication in each area. So you see here an example of the verbal language, many aspects that can play a role in a communication that can block the communication. Another aspect of the area tongue is the non-verbal language. Also, you see a lot of possible factors that influences the communication. And it's a pity I cannot elaborate on each of these factors, but again, in our book and in our certification training, we give a lot of examples what these factors mean. And maybe very important is that we, 2 differences with a culturalistic approach, we don't label these differences as cultural, because there can be other reasons why people greet in a different way, or why they don't have eye contact. For us, it is about diversity, not only cultural. And the second thing is that we don't link it to certain countries or certain ethnic groups or certain religions. For us, they are just communications differences. You can meet these kind of differences with all people, even with people from your own group. So that are, I think, very important differences with the culturalistic approach, where each difference is linked to a national culture or to a certain religion. Okay, then the second aim is the TOPOI lens. The TOPOI lens is a heuristic lens to zoom in during a conversation or afterwards, to reflect from what went wrong in our conversation. You can zoom in on these 5 areas in the communication to find out what went wrong. So for each area, there are some reflection questions. For instance, in the area tongue, you could ask yourself or also ask the other person, so what is each person saying and how? I will illustrate it with the case study after this slide. So also the non-verbal language is very important, that you ask yourself, what does it mean? What kind of interpretation do I give to the body language of the other person? And what does he or she mean with her body language? Now, in the second area, that's the order, that's the content level. It's about the issues, the view, and the way of the logic of the persons involved concerning the issues at hand. You could ask, what is everyone's view on the issues? What is his or her belief, the opinions they have? So to find out, to examine these points of view, and it's very important to recognize them. In the third area, it's the area of persons. It's important to reflect on the question from how does each other, how does the other, and does everybody see each other? Also, how do you present yourself, in which identity, in which role? How do they experience the mutual relationships between me and the other person? Then the organizational level, it's very important to reflect the situational, organizational, and societal factors that play a role in the concrete conversation. Because many differences, many misunderstandings, they are caused not because of a culture, but because of certain situational, organizational, or societal influences. And the last and very important area, the reflection questions are, what is the motivation of each person? Often we forget to ask or to find out what is exactly the motivation. Why do people what they do? Why do they think what they think? What is important for them? So the question, what are everyone's motives, emotions, needs, and values? The TOPOI lens also pays attention to the influence, mostly, usually it is unconscious, of social representations. And I think this is also a very important aspect of our approach, that we pay attention to these social representation. Social representations are the prevailing historical and current collective experience of the persons involved. You can think of slavery, colonialism, racism, political suppression, all these kind of experience the collective of a certain person has had, still can influence the communication of a person in what he or she understands, but also in what he or she says. And social representations are also the prevailing beliefs, norms, and images, prejudices, stereotypes, also single stories in the social context of the persons involved that can influence the communication of a person. So these social representations suddenly can influence the interpersonal communication. You cannot concretely identify social representations in the statements of particular persons, but they are created in the media, in books, in stories, in what people say on the street, at the kitchen table, and what is transmitted in your upbringing, in your education, and at school. So social representations are, so to speak, in the air and in the collective memories of people. Good. To illustrate this, how it could work, this TOPOI lens, and also how it worked in a collegial intervention we had with professionals. This is a case study that I got received in a workshop with professors from a Dutch university. And one of him, it was a man, he is also a tutor, wrote this case study. So often I ask the people from, can you please send me a case study and also your question? And this tutor wrote the following case study. He wrote, a Surinamese Chinese student in the third semester of the bachelor study Human Resource Management has a slightly physical disability. She is not assertive. In student groups, she doesn't say much and she is withdrawn. She finds it hard to participate in discussions, to say her opinion, and to be critical towards colleague students in discussions. She tells me she's not happy about that herself. My colleague professors fear that she's not competent for the study Human Resource Management and that she will fail for her internship that is coming up. I asked her whether her lack of assertivity is due to her culture. The student confirmed this and felt relieved. She said that it is impossible for her to be assertive at home. I then ended the conversation. And now he wrote, it poses me for a major dilemma. On one side, the bachelor study program finds it crucial that all students have a critical and assertive attitude. On the other side, he wrote, to be assertive conflicts with the culture of this Surinamese Chinese student and maybe also with that of all other international students. So for me, it is a very interesting case study because you see how powerful a culturalist approach actually is. He immediately, the cultural background of this student immediately draws his attention. I really didn't add the sentence that she's slightly disabled. This is what the tutor himself wrote in his case study. But you see how the national background of this student was for him the most important explanation for her behavior. And it puts him in a big dilemma, not only with the student, he makes it even bigger by presuming that it also will be a problem, that it would also conflict with the culture of all other international students. So that was his questions in the workshop. And we discussed it, and with the help of the TOPOI lens, we analyzed it in a different way. So maybe you can share very shortly your thoughts about what goes wrong in this case study and what could the tutor do different. And then I will show you how what we found, what we discovered when we applied the TOPOI model, the TOPOI lens on this case study. And so maybe we take 2 minutes that you can write some thoughts about what goes wrong, what could do the tutor in another way. Okay, maybe we can discuss your thoughts after I presented the analysis with the TOPOI model. So so I give it in the order of the 5 TOPOI areas, but of course it was more spontaneous, and it's not important that you start with the language and then order and person and so on. So you can start in each area, and a change in one area also can have a big impact on the whole case study, and the whole analysis of the whole case study. So first of all, in the area of language, it is typical that the tutor has suggestive questions. He asks her, has it to do with your culture? So it would be good to have open-ended questions. So these analyses, they are not the truth, but they are hypotheses. So the more hypotheses you can develop, the more ideas you have for intervention. So it would be also interesting to examine the meaning of assertiveness, and maybe the students associate that her connotation of being assertive is that you are impolite. So it would be good to ask her what does it mean for you as to be assertive, and also that the tutor himself explains what assertive means for the study human resource management. In the area of order, it's about the view and the logic of the persons. His point of view of the tutor is that it is a cultural issue, but it would be already make a big difference in his approach when he sees as a common issue of a study issue. And there are many students who have problems with assertiveness. So it would already change a lot for him if he could become aware that it is just a study issue. Somebody has difficulties in expressing his own opinions, to be critical, and so on. So the intervention could be see and name the issue within the context of the university as a common study issue. And then he gets lots of ideas what he could do. Also, maybe in this area of order of the view of this tutor, that there is an influence of social representations that are prevailing in the Netherlands, and that you must respect other cultures and you must not discriminate. And maybe this kind of social representation, these norms, have an influence on his view. So it would be good that he becomes aware that this social representation puts a kind of pressure on his view, that he immediately thinks, oh yeah, it has to do with the culture of the student, and I have to respect it. I must not discriminate her because of her cultural background. In the area of persons, where it is about identities, roles, and relationship, he approaches her as a Surinamese Chinese. She sees herself as a daughter. She says, it is for me impossible to be assertive at home. But in the context of the university, he should address her as a student, as he addresses many students with this kind of problems. And that would already also help him a lot to see her as a student, and also to say her, okay, I can understand that at home it's very difficult, very hard for you to be assertive. But now you're studying here, you are in the third semester. What are the difficulties? Why is it difficult for you to be assertive, to say your opinion and participate in discussion? That could also make a big difference. In the area of organization, it's very important to examine to find out in which situations the student is not assertive, but also to ask her, are there situations that you are able to be assertive? And so to examine the context in which a student is not assertive or is assertive. And so what about the fellow students, the teacher-student interaction, the didactic methods, the learning environment, all these kind of contexts could play an important role in the problem the student brings in this case study. And the last area of intentions, very important. Of course, the tutor has his positive intentions. He wants to pay respect to her culture, but he should be aware of the effect of his intention, that in that way he takes himself out of his power. So he doesn't know what to do, because a culture is very hard to change, but also he takes the power out of the student in the sense that she has the feelings, she's relieved, I don't need to change it because it's part of my culture. And a very important sentence we found out in this case study is the sentence that the student herself says, I'm not happy about that, that I'm not assertive. So behind this statement, there is a wish. You could presume that there is a wish behind this statement, that she wants to change something about it. So it would be good to explore the meaning of this statement, in the sense of what do you mean that you're not happy about not being assertive? So in that way, you see that with all these with these reflections in these 5 TOPOI areas, the tutor has a lot of ideas what he could do in a different way, and to open up the communication again. And that's his dilemma because of the problem that assertiveness would conflict with the culture of all international students disappears, because it is a normal, common issue, and it is an issue only between him and the student. So very short, very quick, that's the TOPOI model, and that's the way how you could use it, how it could be helpful when you meet differences in the communication with people with a different background, how you could analyze it, reflect it, and how you could intervene, what you could do. So, yeah, I think now is the time to start the discussions, questions you have, and your thoughts.
I just want to share one more thing before we go out.
Okay, of course.
Which is if you would like to learn more, this is something we forgot to mention before, is that we're actually running also a certification training on the TOPOI model in Utrecht in May. So if you're interested in that, I will copy paste also the link to more information in the chat. It's basically a training of 3 days. One is an extensive introduction day, inspiration day, as we call it, for those that are not so familiar with the model yet. And on the 9th and 10th, we go more into depth with the real certification training, where we give kind of guidelines, backgrounds, insights in how to apply it in training courses, in university courses, lectures, and whatnot. And it will take place in Utrecht, the Netherlands. For those that are outside the Netherlands, because we have gotten questions from people, because it does not involve stay overnight and meals, except for lunch, which is extensive. So it might get you through a part of the day, but still, that we offer €500 discount for those people that need to travel and need to pay their stay. So take a look. I'll copy paste it in the chat in a second. And then we have some 10 minutes left for questions. And while other people may ask questions, I can first get to Magda's question, who had a really good point. Going back to the slide on ethics, couldn't the notion of human rights be seen as pluralistic rather than universalistic? Yes, it could. So one way to see pluralism is, again, is taking the merits of both universalism and relativism. It's a synthesis. And I think Declaration of Human Rights would be, for me or for us, and we argue this in our book as well, on our chapter on ethics, as a positive example of universalism, right? Where human rights, if you look at their conception and you look at how they're stated, kind of allows or even encourages space for cultural difference and the expression of cultural difference in and of itself. So yes, I think you could definitely argue that. And you could even argue that there's good ways of universalism and good ways of relativism that don't fall into these pitfalls that in themselves are then pluralist. So it's all the scale. So absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's clear. Cheers.
Okay. Good. What other questions or thoughts do people have at this point? How many seconds was it again, Edwin? There was a didactic
18.
amount of
18.
How many? 18.
18 seconds.
18 seconds. All right.
Yeah.
If there are no urgent questions.
I can have another one, but I feel like I'm kidnapping the conversations.
Not at all, I think. So go for it, and maybe you'll inspire other people to also.
No, thank you for walking us through the model. It's something I'm kind of discovering and learning. So my question might be quite basic, but I'll show it anyway. So yeah, I wonder, as I was listening to the presentation by Edwin, I guess I'm wondering where do you see a place of the conversation about kind of underlying values in that model? Because I'm clear about what the criticism is about the broader view, or I would say very much a direct lens on the interaction, and all those points are very valid. I do wonder if you do see yeah, a place for conversation around values that actually might be underlying, you know, some of those elements of the model.
Yeah, for me, values is takes place in the area of intentions. It's an inner category you don't see, but they play an important role. So indeed, it's very important to find out the values. To ask why do you do that? For instance, when it is about I think of a child protection organization who I did a workshop for them, and one of the participants came up with a father who beats his children. That you ask him, what is important for you? Why do you beat it? So in that sense, you can talk about certain values. He has to be polite. Say, okay, I can understand that. So for me, the recognition, the dialogue, as Arjan told, is very important, that you don't judge but condemn. Okay, it said, I can understand that, but your child has no pain. He is withdrawn. He doesn't feel safe. Is that also what you want? So in that sense, you can talk about values, recognizing them, but also discuss and the behavior of somebody. So the values, Hofstede often talks about these kind of values. That we included that in this area of intentions. That's important to find out what the values are of the persons you're talking to, or also to explaining your own values. And that has done something to do also with these ethic limits, that you say, okay, we don't accept beating a child because of the physical integrity. So in that sense, yeah, it's included there, and very important to examine the values of each other, and to also to explain them.
Yeah.
Is that an answer for you?
If I could just add to that. So if you're thinking again, like also in terms of values specifically, for example, as how they're stated in cross-cultural models and such, then basically what we do is we do use these theories and these research to kind of underpin the contents of the areas, the TOPOI areas. But instead of saying, now you're interacting with someone from culture X, this is what these values are like, we're saying, well, there's a plethora, there's a continuum of all these values. You're going to meet an individual person that is maybe somehow somewhere on the scale, right? So it's an option, it's an opportunity that this plays a role. But rather than saying it's person from culture X, so they have values X, we're saying there's values A to Z. One of these values may play a role, right? Because one thing that we also know, and this should be, I guess, an obvious point, but meta-analyses of all these studies have shown that, no surprise, the variety within cultures is always bigger than between them. So again, if you take the transition point of view, sure, it makes sense. I'm going to move to China. I need to learn something about patterns that I'm probably going to experience when I go to China. It makes sense. But now I'm going to meet an individual Chinese student or team member. And then to take that as a predictive element for what this person is going to be like is really going out on a limb. So we use it as an underpinning, but then we turn it around and say it's an opportunity, it's an option. And you're going to have to figure out who this person is in the interaction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. But so if I understand correctly, then that means, yeah, you can't escape the first the first element, as in, you know, kind of looking at certain characteristics of the cultural definition, because then you don't have the data of the continuum. That's what I'm saying. I guess.
No, sure, but then it's also not limited to those, right?
Yeah,
There's many other aspects that could come into play. So if you know, just to give one example from a research in Sweden I recently learned about, which was tied to values, and I actually challenged if this is about values. It was about someone who researched on Somalian families in Sweden, and they interviewed women of around 40 years old on their willingness to learn the Swedish language. And it turned out that for many women, the reason they didn't want to learn the language and they weren't motivated is because their life expectancy in Somalia was up until about 50 years old. So they saw this situation as, I don't have that long to live. It's not worth the time investment to learn this language. I better focus on my kids and make sure that they find their way. Whereas from a Swedish perspective, no, you're going to live until at least 80 years old, right? You have 40 years left, right? is this a value? You can debate if that's about a value, how we should define it. It's a different perspective coming in this case, I would argue, more from societal context, right? Socioeconomic conditions. So we underpin the area of, my point is that we underpin these areas of order and intentions partly from these kind of values that are, if you want to call it, unescapable, if you want to use these studies, yes. But there's many other studies as well that you can use to underpin the existence of different perspectives and intentions. If that makes sense.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's much broader in that sense, like you say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other thoughts? And then, if not, then I will formally now turn off